Oh, but I'm not going to, they only need to see you because you're going to be doing the lecture.
No, she's introducing us.
Oh, okay.
All right, so welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for the How to Improve Gut Health and Boost Immunity talk with Jill Jones and Michele Clark here. Jill is one of our volunteers that has presented for us multiple times. She's great at finding that new information on health and wellness and presenting it in a way to show you how you can include it in your own life and daily practice. And with her today, we have Michele Clark, who is an associate professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Well, that's.
So she's also got great information on, the innovative, cutting edge health and wellness topics. So we are coming to you live online and in person. So for our online audience, thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions, type them in the chat and we are happy to answer them for you at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, welcome them.
Online people, you probably won't see me again because I'm going to be working with our face-to-face after Jill's presentation ends. We're going to be doing some stuff. I think that'll be really fun and exciting to help you remember some of the wonderful content that Jill has to offer. So I look forward to this.
Thanks, Michele. Thanks for working with me on this. I really do appreciate it. Well, this presentation is about the bacteria in our gut. I have to remember to stand for that. It's about the bacteria in our gut and their role in our health. And so there's other things in there with the bacteria. There's some viruses and fungi and other microbes, but they're very few. It's a very small percent of the overall community. And so a term that's used to describe all of these organisms, they're microscopic organisms, a term that's used to describe them is microbiome. And the microbiome includes all their genetic material because bacteria are single cell little creatures and they have their own DNA, a lot of it. And so that's part of the microbiome. And what Michele and I want to do is bring you this new information. There's been an explosion of research in the last, I'd say, 3 years? Just in the last couple of years about what these bacteria do for us. So what we wanted to do is bring this to you rather than just leaving it up there in the science journals until it trickles down. And it's about preventing disease. It's all about preventing disease, or if we have like chronic diseases now, it's in improving them or turning them around. That's what this is about. And so here are the questions that we want to answer today. Where do these bacteria come from in the first place? And what are they doing in our gut? And what factors determine the different species, the different strains of bacteria we'll have in our gut? And how does that impact our own health? And then, of course, the last question is, what can we do to keep these bugs happy? Here are core concepts that I'm going to be referring to these terms over and over again. But as I said before, the microbiome is a community of organisms that we have actually all over our body. So there are bacteria in your skin and inside your body in different locations. But 90% of them, or over 90% of them, are in our gut. That's why we always talk about the gut microbiome. Diversity, that's the total number of bacterial species we have in our gut that we're carrying around. And so you've heard strains, you might have seen bacteria listed on yogurt or something. Those are strains, those are subspecies. So diversity is the total number of species, and then that also includes the amount of each individual strain of bacteria when we see diversity. Higher diversity means lower risk of disease and better health. So our goal is to get our microbiome to be more diverse, to have more of a variety of bacteria in there. And of course, diet is the most important factor that contributes to the mix of these bacteria. Diet, the food we eat, is what's feeding them, because like I said, they're living creatures in there. Okay, so before we go any further, I figured I better define what a gut is, because if you're like me, I used to think it was our stomach. But it turns out the gut is the whole digestive tract. And its job, the digestive tract here, its job is to absorb nutrients from the food we eat and then eliminate the waste. But it starts in a mouth, and it's a long tube, and then there's this bulge, which is our stomach, and another long twisty tube. Our small intestines are 22 feet long, and our colon is 6 feet long. So it's a very long tube, kind of with a bulge in the middle. Now, as I said earlier, these gut bacteria do have a big influence in our health. There's up and down the GI tract, there are pockets of them, but in the colon is where they're really concentrated. The vast majority of these bacteria are in our colon, and they're packed very tightly. So here's some facts about them. There's 40 trillion bacteria total in our microbiome, 40 trillion. That's hard to grasp. But if you look at the number of cells in the human body, the estimates are there's 37 trillion cells in the human body. And that's for a 150-pound person. If you're bigger, you have more cells. But anyway, there's almost a 1-to-1 ratio between the numbers of these bacteria and our own human cells. There's over 1,000 species that have been identified that live in our bodies. The other interesting and important point is that they have 22 million genes. Now, when you think of our human genome, it's only 23,000. So these guys have 22 million genes, and their genes can do things for us that our own genes can't. So a gene tells, kind of is the instructions to tell a cell what to do. Well, in our human genes, we don't have instructions for breaking down fiber. We're really dependent on specific types of bacteria to break down the fiber and other things. I mean, these bacteria can extract more nutrients out of the food, more than our own human genes. And they weigh between 3 to 6 pounds, depending on when you go to the bathroom, I guess. Okay, so how did they get in there in the first place? Well, it starts out when we're born. When the baby's in the womb, it's a pretty sterile environment. And so the baby will pick up its microbiome. It will start picking up all those bacteria as it travels down the birth canal. And so the baby's mouth and everything, it's picking up bacteria all over, and that's where it's starting. That's the start of the baby's microbiome.
I'm so sorry.
So what else contributes to this microbiome is once you're born in the hospital room, whoever touches you, whatever microbes are in that room where you're born, that's all going to be contributing to your new microbiome. So if it's cesarean section, then you don't get all that from your mother. You're not going to get all that bacteria from your mother. You're going to be picking up whoever's in the room and whatever bacteria in the room. So the fact is, people who are born by cesarean section are missing some of the strains. And that contributes to allergies later on. But anyway, it all makes a difference if you're allowed to play with pets or allowed to play in the dirt. Every time you're interacting with the environment, if you have a big family, you have a lot of friends over, all of us are carrying these bacteria, and the child is picking these up. And so by the time a child's age 3, the microbiome is pretty well established, so that You'll still be adding different bacteria and so forth later on, but what's determined at the age of 3 is the bacteria that you'll be able to carry as an adult. So here are some of the, all these factors contribute to the bacteria in our gut, the types of bacteria in our gut. Foods are number 1. Antibiotics is really important because antibiotics wipe out your microbiome. So it just wipes out the good bacteria along with the bad bacteria. But the good news is it does come back. It takes about 1 to 2 months. After you have a course of antibiotics, it takes about 1 to 2 months to come back. All these other things, the home environment, geographic location, do I live in Tucson or Europe somewhere? You'll have a European microbiome versus one from Tucson. Stress does change the microbiome. Stress does affect our microbiome. So does sleep. Exercise promotes more of a healthy microbiome. And the other point on all of this is every microbiome is unique, even with twins. So all of us, we probably only have 30% in common, which is different than our human genes. Our human genes, we have 99 point something percent. But the gut bacteria, it's like a fingerprint. So the gut bacteria in healthy people are different than those in people with certain diseases. The composition of the bacteria the different strains that we have in our bodies contribute to digestion, to weight, to our immune system. And it really pushes us, whatever's in there is pushing us either towards a healthy body or towards disease. So what I thought I'd do on digestion is walk you through a really simple example of digesting carbohydrates. So you have complex carbohydrates, which is fiber, versus the simple carbohydrates, which is mostly sugar, glucose. So what happens is you have a choice here. Eat a piece of cake, what happens? Well, goes down into the stomach and starts out in the mouth, of course, with digestive juices, down into the stomach with more enzymes and acids breaking the food up. And then it gets into the small intestine. And whenever it gets in the small intestine, its job is nutrient absorption. That's where the nutrients get picked up and get out into our bloodstream to give us energy. Well, when the simple carbohydrates, the sugar-based kind of things get in there, there's not really any nutrients and they're really easy to break down. So they get absorbed very fast into the system. And so the more we eat of those type of food, that's getting absorbed very quickly and hitting our bloodstream. And that's when the glucose level goes up. And some of us, our Western diet put us in this predicament. So our glucose can go up fairly easily. Now, contrast that. Oh, and then so what happens is pretty much there's nothing left over to go down and be excreted. There's nothing much left over to get into that colon. Most of it's been broken down and sent out into the bloodstream. If you take broccoli, for instance, an example of a complex carbohydrate that has a lot of fiber in it, same process, it gets down into the stomach and all the juices and it keeps being broken down, but it can't get broken down as much as a simple sugar. So when it gets into the small intestines absorb all the nutrients they can out of the parts of the broccoli that are not fiber. So anything that's not fiber, it can get absorbed in nutrients and vitamins and minerals and so forth into your system. But the fiber then gets, the leftover fiber, which is a large part of this, gets down into the colon. And that's where the microbiome is there, all those bacteria, and they start munching on it. Because what they eat for food is plants. Plants are the food of the microbiome in your colon. And so this is kind of an example, and this is really, I think, a key chart in this presentation, because what it's showing is, what I'm trying to show here, is that the food we eat determines what bacteria are here, but not only that, what chemicals they produce. And this is the key to the whole thing, is that these bacteria are picky eaters. They'll want to like raspberries, want to like, I don't know, broccoli or something. They all have their things that they like to eat, all their different foods that they like to eat. And all those different foods and those different strains of bacteria determine this whole chemical factory that's being produced. And so the bacteria here, they're capable, they're getting more vitamins out of the food, so they're actually making vitamins, they're making hormones, the hormones that tell you that you're full or that you're still hungry. It makes enzymes and neurochemicals. These bacteria are capable of making serotonin and dopamine and GABA and a bunch of other neurochemicals. So they're making almost drug-like chemicals, and thousands of them are being produced. Short-chain fatty acids is something that Michele and I listen to a lot, but what they're really, really important. So if you're Googling any of this information or following up on it, when they mention that, those molecules are the ones that are working with our immune system and raising and lowering the levels of inflammation. And there's a lot of other things they do, but that's one of the really big ones. So this is just a summary chart. You can see the blood plant-based foods control our glucose levels, and we don't get as much sugar in our system with them. And they help improve immune function. They make us feel full, and overall they will lower inflammation. That's one of the jobs they do for us. And then, of course, the opposite is true with simple carbs, the ones that get into your system quickly with sugar. Oops. Oh, I goofed. Let me see. Oh, there we go. It's new. Hit the wrong button. Okay. Here's an experiment that was done that was kind of interesting. And I say one, but there's been many repeats of this. But what happens when they're testing microbiomes for health and disease and what bacteria are in there, they're able to raise these mice. The original studies were all done in mice, some done in humans now. But they can raise mice in a lab that are germ-free. They keep them in a sterile environment when they're born. They have no microbiome whatsoever. They're just germ-free. They have no bacteria in their bodies. And so what they have done in this case is they have strains of mice that are naturally overweight, and they have strains of mice that are naturally lean. So what they did is they took microbiome from a lean mouse and put it in one of the germ-free mice, and they took a microbiome from one of the overweight mice and they put that in a germ-free mouse. And they gave them the same lifestyle habits. They ate the same food, they had the same amount of exercise, same amount of sleep, everything the same. But the people who had the microbiome from the overweight mice made twice as much fat. They made twice as much fat, even though they did everything the same. And that was because of specific bacteria were there in their gut, or they could have been missing some too. But anyway, it was the microbiome that caused the obesity. And then they've repeated this in humans. They've taken the human microbiomes and put them in these germ-free mice, even from twins. It's the same thing that's true with twins. So now gut bacteria, they play a key role in the educating and the functioning in our immune system. Our immune system cannot function properly without these bacteria. So it's interesting, if you're on a course of antibiotics, it makes it difficult. So only take those antibiotics whenever you really have to. But anyway, what happens is these bacteria are located in places around our body along with our immune system. So like I said, the majority of everything is in our gut. Our immune system and our gut bacteria are all in our colon. But at different parts of the body, we have these bacteria and immune cells constantly talking to each other. There's a thin barrier that divides them. So they do a lot of crosstalk between that barrier. And a lot of us know that we have our immune cells that are born in our bone marrow and also in our thymus, the T cells. And what happens is when these cells are born, they move to other areas of the lymphatic tissue in our body. They move to other areas to patrol for invaders. But when they're born, they don't have any information and they need to be trained. And it's the gut bacteria in these different locations of our body that are training our immune cells to recognize the invaders. It's hard to tell the difference between a good guy and a bad guy when these microbes look a lot alike. So it's the bacteria who are training our immune system. And then what the bacteria are doing as well is helping monitor for invaders. They're on the lookout, and a lot of times they will recognize a virus, a bad virus, before the immune cells do. But in any case, it's the bacteria that tell the immune system to go to this area. We have an infection. We have a viral infection or something, but it's the bacteria that sees what's happening and then triggers the bacteria in our gut to send the immune system to that area. So what they also do then is the bacteria gives these signals to increase or lower the number of immune cells. So they really are, every step of the way, they're participating in any kind of an immune response. So how does the gut communicate with the brain? Well, the gut and the brain are talking all the time, and a lot of us probably know that. Mine's talking to me now. But there are two main channels where information passes, and I know people who I see in the room have heard me talk about the vagus nerve a lot. But the vagus nerve is the fast path, they call it the fast path, between the brain and the gut. Because the language going up there is electrical impulses. Vagus nerve is part of our nervous system, so it's electric impulses that are communicating up and down. And so the gut bacteria are constantly giving reports to the brain, what's going on down here, and the brain sends some signals back down. The gut bacteria send 90%. 90% of the information is coming from the gut bacteria to the brain. 90% goes from your gut to the brain, and only 10% coming back down. The other pathway is our circulation. So a lot of those chemicals that are produced by the bacteria, a lot of them will make it outside into the bloodstream and then go up to the brain and cross the blood-brain barrier. We have this blood-brain barrier, but some of these molecules are so small, they can make it across and change the brain in some way. We'll talk a little bit about that, but it can be in a positive way or a negative way. But there are these chemicals, and they get out into our circulation, and that's how they get up to the brain. Now, I mentioned the vagus nerve, and I said I've talked about this before. It's because the vagus nerve is the part of our nervous system that controls relaxation. It controls our relaxation response, and it keeps our body in a state of calmness so we can rest and digest. You might have heard that term, rest and digest. Well, that's what the vagus nerve is responsible for. The other part of the nervous system is our stress response, and they call that fight or flight. I know everybody's heard that one. But the thing here is they counter each other. And so if we're in a state of stress, it'll pass, and then the vagus nerve takes over and calms everything down. Now, sometimes we get in a state of stress and we're just not calming down, our body's still reacting. But the thing about the vagus nerve, because it goes right up into the brain, it's attached into those networks that listen to our thoughts. It responds to our thoughts. So if you ever get in a situation where you want to calm down, when you take deep breaths, you're activating the vagus nerve, and it's helping you calm down. Another thing I did a lot today is humming. When you hum, it activates the vagus nerve and it calms you down. But you can see all the extensions, the branches going out there into your gut. Now, gut bacteria, what's happening in our gut influences what's happening in our brain at the time, our mood. So they actually mirror moods, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that our gut can produce these mood chemicals, serotonin and dopamine and so forth. So they produce, for example, there's a certain types of bacteria, there's a number of them, not just one strain, but there's different strains of bacteria that produce serotonin. And when they do that, if there's enough of those bacteria, it will raise your baseline level of serotonin in your body. So when you wake up in the morning, you have a certain baseline, and I do, of all these mood chemicals. We have a certain baseline that's flowing through our body of dopamine and all these. But when these gut bacteria, for instance, make serotonin, it raises that overall baseline level and puts us in a better mood. So people with a really healthy microbiome do have these bacteria that are making the serotonin. And of course, it works the other way too. If we're missing some, it could make our gut feel like it's a bad mood, our gut unhealthy, and that again affects our mood. But we have a lot of control of this with our thoughts. So we can send signals back down, and I gave you the example of this stress response. The other way these gut bacteria influence our brain, not just in mood, but also the way our brain performs. Whether we can remember things, how well we learn things, our ability to pay attention and to focus. That's all affected by whatever our microbiome is. In fact, there's been studies done that show that I mentioned some of these chemicals leak out of your gut and get up to the brain. Well, they affect the hippocampus. Some of them can affect the hippocampus so that it makes it more difficult for you to remember things. But there's also chemicals that get up there and help your hippocampus and help you focus and learn. There's one of the experiments they did is have dopamine released by they identified bacteria that released dopamine in the gut, and that dopamine went up into the brain, sends signals to have more dopamine released, and that allows a person to be able to focus and pay attention so you can hold your attention more. So it's good to have this kind of bacteria that can produce dopamine too. So now here's a question. Probably all of us can use a little help being raised on a Western diet. So how can we repair our microbiome and improve our health? This was a study that was done, and it got a lot of press. It's published in the journal Cell in 2020. It was published, but it was run at a lab in Stanford. And what they did is they picked two groups of people, two groups of healthy people, and they were ages 39 to 63, and they weren't skinny people. I mean, they had, some of them were, their BMIs went from, I think, 21 to 29 or 30. And so what they did is they put these people into two groups. They checked their microbiomes, and they say relatively healthy because they didn't have any disease yet. They did have, some of them had some inflammation in their body, but they didn't have any, weren't diagnosed with anything. So they were split into two groups and then randomly assigned a different diet. The first group was given one rule. They were told to increase the number of fermented foods they have every day. And most people in our culture don't eat a lot of fermented foods, but other than yogurt. But in any case, most of these people were only eating yogurt, if anything. And so they were told now to increase their fermented foods every day, up to anywhere from 4 to 6 servings. And they had a ramp-up period. So they had 4 weeks to start gradually adding. And then they had a 6-week period where they started really with the measurements. The second group was told to increase fiber in their diet up to 40 grams a day. And again, the whole thing was 10 weeks. Measurements were, does this improve the diversity of the microbiome? And does it improve our nutrient profile? And then what does it do with inflammation? So here's the results. In the fermented foods group, it increased the diversity in the gut bacteria and the microbiomes by 25%. So that was across the board, everybody eating fermented foods, 25% increase in diversity. And it also, across the board, they had about 30 inflammatory markers they were looking at, and all of them were lower. That's unusual. Across the entire group, these inflammatory markers were lower. In the high fiber group, they did improve, just eating the fiber did improve the function of the microbiome. Their bacteria were doing their job better, and there were more bacteria in there, but there was no new bacteria. It did not increase diversity. And they did have a better nutrient profile, better extracting more vitamins and minerals and so forth. The immune response, whether they had low or high inflammation, was mixed in this group because it depended on how bad a shape their microbiome was in the first place. This is, I think, quite interesting. It's so what percent of, first of all, the strains of bacteria, the new strains that were in there, were they from the fermented foods themselves, or did they come from somewhere else? But anyway, so the researchers took the whole list of fermented foods that the people were eating. They analyzed them to see if the bacteria were really in there, and yes, they were really in all those foods that they said on the label. And then it turned out these people did pick up all those bacteria. They were living in their gut. But the finding, which astounded everybody, was only 5% were the bacteria from the fermented foods. All the other 95% came from other sources. So where did those 95% come from? Well, somewhere in the environment, people they came in contact with. Probably a lot of these were living around there all the time. And what happened was, by creating this environment with the fermented foods, they made a more welcoming home for the bacteria to jump in and want to stay there. That's really what happened. Some reason the fermented foods, with all of their enzymes and everything that come with it, created a comfortable microbiome for new species to get in. So For those of you who, like me, I didn't really pay attention. I didn't know what fermented foods were other than yogurt, but I learned. After I saw this study, then I found out where you could buy it, and I have some information for you about where you can buy fermented foods. And these are just jars of vegetables that are raw and cut up and fermented over time, and they would all be in the freezer case, or not freezer, in the refrigerator case, because you need to keep the bacteria alive. But here's a definition. Fermented foods are probiotic foods that contain live microbes intended to increase or improve good bacteria. So it's not a probiotic if it's not increasing the good bacteria. Increase or improve the good bacteria. And that's a probiotic. A prebiotics are all those plants and fibrous materials that were fibrous foods, plant-based foods that we're eating. It's the diet of these bacteria. So fruits and vegetables, nuts, legumes, beans, all that kind of stuff. And here's a picture I just put up here, so especially for the group watching in cyberspace to see, because they don't have all the handouts you do. But these are some pictures as guidelines. I wish I had these, and Michele and I went out and started looking for stuff. But what we did is, like for instance, this called Chacarita mix. That's cut up carrots and jicama that's been fermented. It's in a 16-ounce jar, and they look like this in the display case at Whole Foods. So you go to Whole Foods, and there's sauerkraut up there, and there's all kinds of these fermented foods, and they taste really good. One serving is about an ounce, so you don't have to eat a lot to get a serving. Hum is, that's a fermented tea that tastes like soda. Tastes like, but it's a probiotic tea, kombucha? Did I say that right? Kombucha. It's kombucha. It's a fermented tea. The other one is a prebiotic drink. Now this drink here, it's a can, it's a soda, it looks like a soda can. It has 9 plants in it, and it really does taste like soda. I mean, I just had one before I came here. It was like a root beer soda. It tastes like root beer. But the only sugars in there are the sugars from the fruits. So they only have 35 calories. So all these drinks that taste good have 30, 35, 40 calories in them. And we'll talk more about it whenever presentation's over. So over-the-counter probiotic supplements, those pills that you buy or those capsules, what about those? Well, it's not good. This same group that did the fermented foods and fibers study, also at Stanford, they looked at probiotic supplements, and they found that they did not improve diversity, and they didn't do anything to help inflammation. In fact, they didn't do anything for the microbiome. This is, in your notes here, it's an episode of 60 Minutes. Did anybody see that on probiotics? You did? Okay. What they did is they had people on there, and at the time I didn't believe it because we were all hearing we should take these capsules. Yeah. And I really ignored it actually when it was on. It was in 2020. But what these researchers showed is, and they gave all these examples and showed slides and explained the tests and everything they did. People who took all these different probiotic capsules, and they verified even that the bacteria are in those capsules. Mm-hmm. But sometimes they don't make it to your gut, but sometimes even when they make it, they don't stay. And I figured out from this fermented foods study, it's because the microbiome, you have to have a certain environment for these bacteria to want to stay. Otherwise, they just wash right out, right through your system. So you can read this. It's all these things I've been talking about during the presentation. Lifestyle does matter. Food is the #1 thing that determines what's in there. And fermented foods really gives us a good jump start to getting a healthy microbiome. They had some studies coming out as after COVID, but I'm not going to go through this because I don't want to take up the time. But I gave you the reference material there so that you can look it up. Here's some a facts page. And so that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you again to Jill for that wonderful presentation. It's very informative. So if you have any questions, you can still leave them in the comments, and we're happy to reach out to Jill and Michele for you afterwards to make sure we get all those questions answered. And then you are welcome to join us next week on Wednesday at 10 a.m. for Fragility Fractures Talks with Dr. Patty from Tucson Orthopedic Institute, if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you guys again for joining us for another wonderful and informative presentation here.